Advancing the cause of liberty takes more than just coming up with ideas. It means making them happen. This is Society and the State. Life, liberty, and your pursuit of happiness. Now, your hosts, Connor Boyack and Brian Hyde.
Welcome to Society and the State. This is Connor. I am joined today by our policy analyst at Libertas Institute, Molly Davis. Molly, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
So I wanted to do an episode with Molly because she and I and a few of our policy wonk friends went to prison.
Yep. We got out, though.
We got out, yeah, barely. That friendly guard was questionable, though. Now, I want to do this episode because very few people have actually been to a prison. And until recently, when we went, I had never been. You've actually been to one other prison, right, Molly?
Yep, the one here in Draper.
So we're here in Utah. Obviously, a lot of our listeners aren't. Molly's now been to 2 prisons. I've been to 1. And, you know, around the country, they're going to differ. But I think this is going to be some interesting insight to see how things go. So, Molly, first, let's answer the question, why go to prison at all? Why have you been to 2 prisons?
Well, we work on a lot of criminal justice reform measures, and so I think it's really helpful to have a grassroots understanding of what's actually going on within the prisons rather than just creating policy about them. Now,
a lot of people feel like, oh, they're criminals. They don't deserve any better policy and good food and, you know, playing Xbox all day long. So why try and improve the system? Don't these prisoners just deserve to have an awful experience?
Absolutely not. I mean, you have to keep in mind that most people entering prison are going to be coming out and going back into society someday. And so while we have them locked up, we should be doing all we can to improve their lives. And we can't do that without like basic human needs, like providing good medical care and food and living conditions.
Job training, too, which I think we'll talk about. That was kind of interesting as well. And I found it interesting when we were talking about this with the warden. This was at the Central Utah Correctional Facility, I think is the official name. It was out in rural Gunnison, Utah. And he had an interesting argument that set aside the idea that the prisoners should be in awful conditions. The warden pointed out that with all of the whatever they're called, the law enforcement who were there, the corrections officers, they don't deserve to work in a miserable situation where in a dingy environment where the pipes are leaking and things are smelly and dirty. That wouldn't be good for employee morale, and you'd probably have a lot of turnover and struggle to hire people, right?
Oh, totally. He said the one thing they can do to kind of combat the old facilities and the lack of funding is at least keep the place clean and add a new layer of paint from time to time. But that seems to be the extent of what our funding allows them to do. So
what's interesting is there's a broad range of people who are in prison, right? You've got your jails, which is for your more short-term offenders, more lower-level offenders. But in prison, what's kind of the gamut of people who are in prison? You know, there seems to be, it's not just murderers, right? Who are we talking about?
Well, in this particular prison, the warden even told us that many of the people are there because they're convicted of drug-related charges. So this is not only possession or distribution, but this is also kind of things related to doing drugs or having a drug addiction, such as petty theft to be able to support a habit. And so that's kind of who we're housing, at least a majority of who we're housing.
Let's maybe begin diving into things by getting your high level impression. Okay, so you've been to, let's even use this most recent prison example. We toured a prison. What's kind of your high level reaction or your biggest takeaway or thought?
I think it's really interesting to see how the officers and the prisoners interact. You expect it to be a lot more hostile, and of course we're on a tour, so they're probably putting on their best behavior. But it seems like, I mean, they're just humans. They're just people. They interact with one another. They go about their daily life. The prisoners have tasks to do. They have their jobs and things, and it didn't seem like these awful men all just kind of caged together. It was they're trying to get by.
that was, I think, related to mine, that I found it really fascinating going through there. Of course, with the media and whatever, you've got this idea that as people are being moved through the prison, they're escorted everywhere and they're locked up at all times. I was blown away that on the broader prison campus, there were prisoners walking around all the time, you know, coming and going to a school classroom or out to the baseball field, or, you know, to work in one of the industry jobs. And it was really fascinating to me to just be walking by a bunch of prisoners who were just kind of, you know, going where they needed to go. And so the warden talked about, right, that you've got these different levels, and when they come in, they're presumed to be on good behavior. But obviously, if they get in a fight or smuggle contraband or whatever, then they lose privileges. But everything is kind of privilege based. And so if you've got folks who've never been violent, let's say you got a white collar criminal, right? And he forged a really big check. So he's in prison for 4 years, has never hurt anyone. He's you know, not smuggling anything in. He's just doing his time. A person like that's probably going to have a little bit more quote unquote freedom in the system. I mean, we walked by a room and there's a few guys just jamming on the guitar, you know.
Yeah.
There was a church choir happening with like 6 or 7 prisoners just singing church songs.
You kind of expect everyone to be locked up in their individual cells when you come in, but that's not the way it is at all.
So talk about, along those lines, talk about school. What was some of your observations about these prisoners and going to class, getting an education?
I mean, first off, the shocking thing is a lack of resources, not only for teachers and administration, but also for books and materials. All the classrooms and everything are very kind of outdated, and but it is cool that there are opportunities available. There are people getting their GED,
Mm-hmm.
Getting their high school diplomas, and the fact that they're able to do that is pretty cool behind bars.
Why do you feel education is important? Again, like we combat so often this mentality that like just lock them in a cage, you know, and let them serve their time. Why should we be proactively, especially as taxpayers, on the hook for providing these people resources? You've touched on this a bit, right? They're going to be reintegrated into society. How crucial do you feel education plays a role in that reintegration?
Oh, I think it's absolutely crucial. I mean, we were talking to the principal of the school, and he was telling us that a lot of the guys he sees come into his school aren't able to read. And so that is like a basic thing I think anyone needs to survive, even behind the bars of prison. And so I think even basic math skills, English skills, all of those things, everyone just has to have an understanding of before leading any type of successful life.
The same goes for not only education in general, but an applied trade, right? And building actual marketable skills that can be used. What were some of the industries that we saw in prison that these prisoners were working in?
One of the biggest industries we saw was sign making. All of the state road signs for the highway and all the roads across the state were made in this prison facility, and it's this huge facility with all of these different machinery, and guys are just working and learning the trade, and you know they're only getting paid about 40 cents an hour on average, but that was one of the big industries. And then the other one was sewing. And so they were sewing actually the uniforms for the prisoners, but they also get contract work from time to time as well. And I think, and the other one was construction of, I'm not sure what they were, but like little houses.
Yeah,
and,
like sheds kind of thing.
Yeah, like outdoor sheds. Yeah, and you walk in and there's guys all the prisoners are using power tools and these big saws and everything, and it's just casual. Yeah,
and they're just working. I mean, the warden said they'll go have breakfast, they'll go to the job, they'll have lunch, they'll go back to the job, they'll have dinner, and do it all again the next day. And for some of these long-term offenders, right, he was talking like this is a good way to keep them busy, keep their mind off things. I mean, it was amazing walking in that sewing room, just this massive room, and there's all these like 40, 50, 60-year-old dudes just sitting behind a sewing machine, just cranking stuff out, you know. And it's super interesting to see the opportunity for productivity, right? Like, I think one of my misperceptions has been like you're sitting in a cell just reading books and writing letters and thinking over things. But significant opportunity for not only interaction with other people, right? There are guys playing ping pong and playing video games and just keeping yourself busy, right? Probably learning from the danger of having idle hands, right? When people are, bored and not channeling their energy, they can use it in potentially unproductive ways. Okay, so a lot of the prison was very open, very kind of free-flowing, prisoners moving around, but part of it wasn't. We went to maximum security, and these were some harsh guys. I found it interesting, Molly, that the wardens said not only did maximum security have, obviously, the violent people, the gangbangers, the whoever, that if they were in general population, they would be, causing people harm, killing people. But there were also people in there who were basically like snitches, right? Or people who, if they were in general population, someone else would hurt them. And so almost for protective reasons, not almost, actually for protective reasons, these individuals who would be a victim or a fatality if put in general population were put in maximum security prison, which is crazy because in this particular prison, the warden indicated that until just about a year or two ago, in maximum security, they were in there with another cellmate in a 10 by 12 cell for 23 hours a day. They were let out together with their same cellmate for 1 hour into the common area, and then they were put back in their cell. And for the violent, horrible guys, whatever, I don't have sympathy, fine. If you're going to be in there, if you got a life sentence, you're not getting out anyways. So that kind of gets away from your argument, Molly. Like, again, no real sympathy there. Lock them up, whatever. But it was eye-opening for me to realize that there are people in that same situation who may even be trying to do the right thing, right? They're trying to report on some of their gang activity or something happening, and now they are kind of punished in a way. But the warden indicated they're kind of moving away from that system, right? What were some of the changes that he said they're trying to do?
Yeah, they're given a little bit more freedom, it sounds like. It sounds like they're able to go out of their cell with more people now and have a little bit more leniency on the type of activities they have. And they said, by giving this, it's been a transition for the staff to kind of get used to and get comfortable with, but also the inmates, because they haven't just been surrounded with people for so long, so many years of their lives. I mean, so many of these people have been in here for decades. But the responsibility, they said, has had some pretty good effects. They think it's been positive for everyone, which is great news.
When we walked in, what was the process for check-in, right? We gave our licenses to the front, whatever, the receptionist dude. And then what was the security protocol when we went in?
We had to go through a scanner and then possibly be pat down if you set the scanner off.
Mm-hmm. Basic metal detector, right?
Right. Basic metal detector. Have everything sent through like a metal detector as well. And then we had to go through a series of doors that shut one after another. And I guess beyond that, everyone was just kind of walking around.
What was amazing to me, though, is, in my particular case, I had stuff in my pockets. I took off my belt and put that through the little conveyor belt scanner, right? Because that set off the alarm. Didn't take my shoes off, didn't empty my pockets out. I left my cell phone in the locker because you're not supposed to bring that.
That's true.
But they had no idea what was in my pockets or in my waistband or in my shoes. And it was amazing to me the lack of security protocol to make sure that people didn't have contraband smuggled in, right? Because I could be going in there to volunteer and be around a bunch of prisoners or to visit one particular prisoner. And so we asked the warden about this, right? What were some of his thoughts on smuggling? Did you pick up on anything he was saying? I remember in one instance he was saying that if, like, let's say I went in to visit you and you're in prison because you're a horrible person, obviously, Molly. and so you have a higher privilege, which means that you and I can have what did he call it? A contact visit, I think. So we're just sitting at an open table rather than with a big plexiglass, window and the phones. And so you and I are at the same table. I've come in. I don't have a cell phone. I don't have any metal that I'm not allowed to have. but I can, empty my pockets and say, hey, here you go. Here's what I brought you. And what the warden indicated is that if I do that, I will, and they catch me or catch you and the contraband, they figure out it was me, I will not be allowed to come anymore at all. Permanent blacklist to visit at the prison. And they may even refer it to a prosecutor because that's a crime to smuggle something into a prison. So there's consequences for me. And then for you would, lose privileges and you'd have to kind of work your way back up the totem pole to get some privileges back. So, but I asked the warden, I was like, but don't you guys like pat people down and have like some others? He's like, well, we've been talking about doing that. I'm like, this prison's been around a long time and you've never thought to like give people more thorough, pat downs to make sure they're not smuggled. Cause he was talking about, people smuggle stuff in all the time. What was like the Listerine style? Remember what he's talking about? It's the Suboxone.
Yeah,
which is what's that kind of drug?
Suboxone is similar to methadone, and it's typically a drug that people take when they are trying to detox off of heavy opiates. And so a lot of people are sending them. I guess it can come on like a little strip of paper, and a lot of people are sending them within letters and books, and it's really easy to smuggle in. And so they estimate that they get about 50% of them, but either way, there's no way they can keep them all out. So, and
the warden indicated that the prisoner who told him that kind of, you'll probably catch about 50% of it, was saying that there's still going to be a marketplace for the rest of it, and that was super interesting, contemplating the black market and the within the prison, right, of people, and seeing how free and open it was. Yeah, you're sitting in a, high school English class with 20 other guys. The teacher steps out. I mean, ample opportunity to trade something or talk about something. And you got to wonder how much of that goes on.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, Molly? Any other observations that you had from prison?
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the low wage work a little bit. So we talked about how these guys are working in all these different kind of factories, whether it's sewing, construction, or sign making. And it is a privilege to be there, but there is like a high list of demand. There's a high amount of demand to get one of these jobs, despite the fact that they're being paid like 40 cents an hour. To me, that was a little bit shocking, but I wanted to reflect on the fact that this year, Representative Hollins passed a bill to ban involuntary solitude, so essentially banning slavery in jail and prison in Utah. And now voters will be able to approve that measure in 2020. It's a constitutional change, so it has to be approved by the voters. But and it's a good measure, but I wonder about future changes to possibly paying these guys a little bit more, because for some of the workers or the prisoners who didn't come from a background of money and no one's really in there supporting them, it's going to be hard for them to afford basically anything from commissary. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure. I have some weird feelings about that. I understand it's an opportunity for productivity, but I don't know. It is tough, right? Because the other side is, well, they're not paying room and board. So sure, let's pay them $4 an hour, but then you pay rent. They're also there against their will. So yeah. Although if they've done a horrible thing, again, these are like the weird arguments, right? Is like you want to try and improve the system, but there's some compelling arguments on both sides, I think. Final question, Molly. So we don't have this in Utah, but around the country, there's this idea of for-profit prisons. What are your kind of broad thoughts on for-profit prisons? Would that introduce even more challenges and bad incentives than what we saw on our tour? Yeah, I mean, absolutely. People say it's a good idea because there's going to be more resources, better facilities, but my general principle is that anyone who is profiting off of the state incarcerating people is never a good idea. I mean, there's bail bondsmen is a good example of this, but also you have to keep in mind that I think it was when either Colorado or California were looking to legalize recreational marijuana, one of the biggest points of opposition who spent some of the most money lobbying against it was the private prison industry. So they have an incentive to keep drugs like marijuana illegal because they're profiting off of people who are being convicted on marijuana charges. And that's absolutely wrong. And I'm sure it happens with other crimes too, and we'll see it in the future. And so just because of that alone, I mean, I don't like the idea of private prisons.
It's totally unrelated, but it reminds me seeing about a year ago when there was an effort for federal tax reform to try and simplify the tax code. And one of the biggest opponents was a company by the name of Intuit, which is the company that makes TurboTax, right? They benefit from having a very complicated tax environment so that people are like, oh, let me just pay for TurboTax and these guys will solve all the problems. And so they were fighting efforts to help people, right? Because it wouldn't help them specifically. So we see the same thing with things like private prisons. Super interesting. If any of you have an opportunity to even go to your local jail, contact the sheriff's office and do a field trip, take the family. It'll be a very eye-opening, or do a group, do like a civic, education thing, get some people together, because it is an eye-opening experience. It certainly was for me. And any time that we can get that direct experience and familiarity so that we're no longer trying to talk about things we don't understand, I think that's a good thing. Molly, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, guys, this is Society and the State, episode 146. Stick around next time. We're going to be talking about some effective strategies that we can do to make an impact, and we'll see you then.
You've been listening to Society and the State. For show notes, archives, and more great content, visit societyandthestate.com.